company obligation schemes. So actually, this is a cost of that has contributed towards the saving because you've taken that obligation off energy companies and made it part of general taxation.
There's two things going on. Look, the first thing is we got rid of a scheme that was being funded, the so-called eco scheme, being funded by bill payers, which wasn't a very effective scheme. And we've put some money into public spending to help upgrade people's homes as part of our big homes upgrade. And secondly, we've taken what they call the renewables obligation, or at least 3/4 of it, off levies and put it into public expenditure. You're right about that.
So actually, energy itself hasn't become any cheaper. Oh, blimey. What have we lost there?
No, can you hear me?
No, we've... Unfortunately...
I think your microphone fell off, but if you put it back on, we'll carry on.
Oh,
can you see it?
I got so excited.
You did.
I got so animated.
Yeah.
That,
to go back a couple of weeks ago, you were teetering on the edge of a precipice and you stepped back, Mr. Miliband.
No, is that better?
Yeah, that's so much better when we can hear you. Yes.
So
can you just explain? This isn't because you've done some wonderful thing where you've created a cheap energy that is bringing down our bills. This is simply taking away one of the costs to business, and therefore the bills are coming down.
Well, we've made a political choice, which is that we've raised some taxes on the wealthiest in our society, capital gains tax, dividend tax, tax on large homes, in order to help fund this cut in bills. And I think that's the right choice. And
yeah, but the whole point about your promise when you were running for government was that you were going to create cheaper energy. The fact of the matter is that you haven't, have you? That is not connected with this reduction in price. You've simply sort of changed things on the balance sheet of the energy companies, which has brought the price down. It's sleight of hand.
No, absolutely wrong. That's absolutely wrong. We've made a choice about who this country should work for. Because look, here's my view about this, which is for too long this country's worked for the wealthy and most powerful, not for most of your viewers. And so we've made a choice, which is to raise the taxes on the wealthiest to fund this cut. But you're absolutely right that clean power is the long-term answer by 2030. Now, it takes time to do that. But for example, I was on your programme a few weeks ago talking about the biggest auction ever for solar energy, the cheapest energy that we've got, and that is going to help bring down bills by 2030. So look, this is part of the plan. It's part of keeping the promise we made, and it's part of our recognition about the scale of the cost of living crisis that people face.
Now, before we break down exactly what was said, here is something worth mentioning. 98% of you watching right now have not hit that subscribe button. That is wild when you think about it. You are already here watching British Eyes highlight stories the mainstream media often glosses over. Subscribing costs nothing, takes just 2 seconds, and helps keep this content coming. Right, back to the moment that has Westminster talking. This was one of those interviews where the real story isn't just the policy, it's the framing. At first glance, the government is claiming a win, energy bills are coming down. That sounds like good news. But when you dig into the exchange, the key question becomes, are bills falling because energy is genuinely cheaper, or because costs have simply been shifted around? That distinction matters. What the minister explains is essentially this. The government has removed certain green levies and obligations from energy bills and instead funded them through general taxation. In simple terms, instead of energy companies passing these costs directly on to customers through higher bills, the government is covering part of that cost through public spending. So the interviewer presses the obvious question, has energy actually become cheaper to produce? Or have you just moved the numbers from one column to another? And that's where things get politically sensitive. Because during the election campaign, the promise wasn't just to rebalance costs. The promise was to create cheaper energy, particularly through clean power and renewables. What critics are pointing out here is that the short-term reduction in bills isn't coming from a breakthrough in energy production. It's coming from a fiscal decision, raising taxes elsewhere to offset costs on bills. Now, to be fair, that is still a political choice. The minister openly says so. The government has raised taxes on capital gains, dividends, and expensive properties in order to fund relief on energy bills. Their argument is clear. They believe the wealthiest should shoulder more of the burden so ordinary households feel relief. That's a redistribution argument, not an energy market revolution. And this is where the debate becomes ideological rather than technical. The government's defense rests on two pillars: short-term relief funded through taxation, long-term transformation through clean energy expansion by 2030. They argue that large-scale solar auctions, renewable investment, and infrastructure changes will eventually bring structural price reductions. But, and this is important, that future promise doesn't explain today's price cut. Today's reduction appears to be accounting and taxation-driven. Now, critics would argue that moving levies from bills to taxation doesn't make the cost disappear. It simply spreads it differently. Instead of everyone paying through their electricity bill, people are paying through taxes, albeit targeted more at higher earners. Supporters would respond that this is precisely the point. Energy bills hit lower-income households proportionally harder. Funding green obligations through progressive taxation is, in their view, fairer. So who's right? Economically speaking, both sides are partially correct. Energy hasn't suddenly become dramatically cheaper overnight. There hasn't been a technological leap this week that slashed wholesale costs. What's changed is the funding mechanism. But politically, perception is everything. If voters were led to believe that renewable expansion would rapidly slash bills, and instead see only marginal changes tied to tax policy, trust can erode. Another interesting moment in the exchange is when the minister pivots from technical detail to moral framing. He says, essentially, this country has worked for the wealthiest for too long. That's not an energy argument, that's a fairness argument. He's reframing the energy discussion into a broader economic philosophy debate. This is classic political communication. When challenged on whether a policy delivered exactly as promised, shift to values. Shift to fairness. Shift to long-term vision. And to be clear, long-term energy reform does take time. Expanding solar capacity, reforming grid infrastructure, accelerating renewables, these are multi-year projects. The claim that clean power by 2030 will bring sustained lower bills isn't unrealistic. But it isn't immediate either. The risk for the government is the gap between campaign messaging